Hello, welcome. I'm Elizabeth Coleman. I'm a teaching artist at Northern Clay Center, and we have dusted off some ceramic art history lectures from a class I taught a while ago as a resource for high school teachers or college teachers. The readings for the course are from Emmanuel Cooper's 10,000 Years of Pottery and Susan Staubach Clay. And the readings that would have been done for today's lecture, The Golden Age of Islamic and Chinese Ceramics from 1000 to 1400 CE. The pages are listed here from each book. And I also had the students, the end of lecture 6, I asked them to look up the Jenne culture and the Caddoan culture online. If you'd rather just watch the slideshow and skip the readings, start with the next slide. During the golden age of Islamic and Chinese ceramic, other cultures had some significant ceramic moments that I want to touch on before we get to the really major technological kiln and glaze innovations of the Song Dynasty and the Islamic dynasties. This seated figure made of terracotta is from a site called Jenne Jeno, the oldest known city in sub-Saharan Africa, located in what is now Mali and the inland Niger Delta region. This culture flourished in the 9th century CE, but declined, and the site was abandoned by 1400. Items of cast brass, forged iron, and clay vessels and figures like this one survive. They testify to what scholars contend was a richly varied and highly sophisticated urban society. This figure huddles with its leg hugged to its chest and its head dropped on its knee. Other figures such as this one include jewelry, clothing, and body ornaments, such as the parallel columns of bumps and circles on the back of this piece. Sometimes they cover the entire body and seem to represent the pustules of some dreadful illness. Here the figure's shaved head and attitude of introspection resemble mourning customs still practiced by many cultures in sub-Saharan Africa. In the Americas during this time period, we have consolidation of populations and political centralization, particularly in the eastern woodlands and the southwest. The success of food crops such as maize and beans allowed for meaningful concentration of people. Settlements were enlarged along local patterns with individual centers assuming regional dominance. Cahokia on the Mississippi River floodplain of Illinois expanded during this time. Its over 100 earthen mounds were used for various purposes. Important Mississippian sites in the southeast, such as Moundville, Spiro, and Etowah, show clear evidence of high-ranking inhabitants with many precious objects in their burials. This bowl is 6.5 inches tall and was found in what is now Missouri. The human head poised on the rim of this bowl is counterbalanced by a horizontal lug-like tail, a common feature on bowls of this period. While of apparent practical purpose, the tail is a visual complement and formal balance to the head with its discernibly human aspect. Mississippian pottery was discovered in quantity in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when large stretches of the Midwest and South began to be extensively farmed, and the ancient mounds were broken into or plowed down. Often associated with or buried in actual mounds, the vessels were dubbed mound builder at the time, until the connection was made between the Mississippian culture and those objects. So we now understand them to have been made by people of the Mississippian culture, which flourished in the centuries before the arrival of Europeans in North America. The westernmost region in which Mississippian cultural patterns occurred was in eastern Oklahoma, and adjacent areas of Missouri and Arkansas. Called Caddoan Mississippian culture, the major center for the Caddoan group was at Spiro in LaFleur County, Oklahoma, where a new type of construction was undertaken in the 13th century that combined aspects of both ceremonial platforms and mortuary mounds into one structure. The incised patterns on Caddoan pottery depicted here are elegantly conceived and executed. This bottle is reported to be from Yell County in west central Arkansas. In the American Southwest, the ancient Mimbres people lived in the Mimbres Valley, which was located in the Mogollon cultural area in southwestern New Mexico. The Mimbres, like their neighbors, the Hohokam to the west and the Anasazi to the north, were farmers and lived in pit houses in later pueblos. The Mimbres are best known for their pottery. From 750 until 1130 CE, the Mimbres produced black on white painted pottery, decorated with sophisticated painted images of birds, animals, and men. Done primarily in black on a more or less white ground, the Mimbres images are noteworthy for their spontaneity and individuality. No other group of southwestern peoples decorated ceramic vessels in a similar manner. While many Mimbres bowls feature geometric patterns, the common regional mode of embellishment, the figurative and narrative imagery is unique to the people of the Mimbres Valley in the early centuries of the second millennium. The pairing of figures is much favored. Deer, antelope, rabbits, and mountain sheep, the latter seen in the bowl here, are more frequently depicted in this manner. The bowls have largely been discovered in subfloor burials, customarily only one to a burial site, where they were placed over the face of the deceased. Many are pierced or, quote, killed, end quote, and the significance of such kill holes is unclear. Kill holes is a term used by anthropologists. Explanations for them range from rendering the bowls functionally useless to allowing their spirit or that of the deceased to escape. Again, a kill hole is a term used to describe a hole found in the bottom of most Mimbres bowls, which were interred with the dead and placed over or near the skull. The Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE. His followers, led by a series of 4 caliphs, known as the rightly guided, continued to spread the message of Islam. Under their command, the Arab armies carried the new faith and leadership from the Arabian Peninsula, here marked in green, to the shores of the Mediterranean and to the eastern reaches of Iran. The rightly guided caliphs conquered Syria, Palestine, and Egypt from the Byzantine Empire, while Iraq and Iran, the heart of the Sasanian Empire, succumbed to their forces. So the area in green indicates the territory that they brought under Islamic influence. While the full formation of a distinctive Islamic artistic language took several centuries, the seeds were sown during the Prophet's time. Because it is through writing that the Quran is transmitted, the Arabic script was first transformed and beautified in order that it might be worthy of divine revelation. Thus, calligraphy, or beautiful writing, started to gain prominence, becoming essential to Islamic ornament. Perhaps the most salient characteristics of Islamic art is the predilection for all-over surface decoration. The 4 basic components of Islamic ornament are calligraphy, vegetal patterns, geometric patterns, and figural representation. Of course, the lands newly conquered by the Muslims had their own pre-existing artistic traditions, and initially, at least, those artists who had worked under Byzantine or Sasanian patronage continued to work their own indigenous styles, but from Muslim patrons. The first examples of Islamic art therefore rely on earlier techniques, styles, and forms reflecting this blending of classical and Iranian decorative themes and motifs. Only gradually, under the impact of the Muslim faith and nascent Islamic state, did a uniquely Islamic art emerge. The rule of the Umayyad Caliphate between 661 and 750 CE, shown here in pink, is often considered to be the formative period in Islamic art. Later, during the Abbasid dynasty between 750 and 1258, shown in yellow-orange, the territory was expanded. And this is important for ceramic art history because the Islamic potters were incredibly innovative and gave us at least 5 important techniques spread throughout the entire territory. Here we have a Samarkand, which is now where Uzbekistan is, or a Nishapur, where Iran is, bowl. Examples of this type of bowl were found in both places. It's earthenware, a red body covered with a white engobe and underglaze painting. The potters in Samarkand made the discovery that painted decoration, usually so apt to run and lose definition under a fluid lead glaze, remained much more stable when the metallic coloring pigment was combined with a paste of fine slip. This example presents the combination of features typical of the finer black on white wares: exquisite design, fine calligraphy, pure white engobe, and colorless glaze, all adding up to a striking effect. Inscriptions figure prominently in the decoration of objects throughout the history of Islamic art. Here we see an example of Kufic Script, which is the oldest calligraphic form of various Arabic scripts. The first copies of the Quran were written in Kufic Script. In Samanid bowls, such as this one, the script is used with an unequaled purity and power, both as calligraphy and to enhance the object it decorates. This bowl is unusually large, measuring 18 inches in diameter, and is an especially fine example of its kind. The Islamic potters discovered that they could opacify lead glaze by adding tin, and so they glazed earthenware with an opaque tin glaze and were the first culture to do so. They were trying to imitate Chinese porcelains that they had imported. Another important contribution to the ceramic industry in the early Islamic period was the application of the luster painting technique to pottery. Previously used to decorate glass, luster painting, as employed by 9th century ceramists in Baghdad, left a permanent imprint on the ceramic industry in general, and its influence is still evident in the luster painted ware made today. For this extremely difficult process, silver, gold, and copper oxides, each mixed with a medium, were used to paint designs on a vessel already covered with an opaque tin glaze. During a second firing in a reducing kiln, oxygen was drawn out of the metal suspended on the surface to refract light and create a lustrous appearance. The polychrome luster painting technique was extremely short-lived. More certain of success was the monochrome variety, since only one color was involved in the execution of a design. Monochrome luster painting spread from Iraq to Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Syria, Iran, Spain, England, and eventually to America. This bowl exhibits many of the design characteristics of the monochrome luster painted wares of the 10th century in what is now Iraq. The caricature-like quality of the seated man holding a beaker in one hand and a flowering branch of the other, the plain border surrounding him and the 2 birds holding fish in their beaks, the speckled background, the scalloped rim design, and the exterior decoration of a series of 3 concentric circles evenly spaced around the wall on a field of dashes and dots. The foot bears the Arabic word for blessing in Kufic Script. Another innovation made during this time period was a composite or fritware body invented first in Egypt, but perfected for pottery by the Persians. A fritware body, clay body, is made of crushed glass and clay. It's also sometimes called pasteware or quartzware. This was invented by Middle Eastern potters around the middle of the 11th century to imitate the hard, bright, white porcelain body of imported Chinese goods. These 2 bowls represent what is called Menai ware, which is an overglaze enamel technique also invented during this time period. In an attempt to increase the number of colors in their palettes, 12th century Iranian potters developed a technique now known as minaye, or enameled, in which stable colors were stain painted on a lead glaze, opacified with tin, and after a first firing, less stable colors were applied, and the object was refired at a lower temperature. Soon they were performing the enameling on top of the fritware, which fired white on its own without the tin glaze. The polychrome ceramics are painted in a range of colors in a style similar to that found on manuscript illustrations that became popular during the Seljuk period in Iran. The style of these figures echoes that of those in the few Persian paintings on paper extant from this period, and thus Menai ware serves to increase our knowledge of painting in the early medieval period. Figural designs, as opposed to stylized vegetal ones, seem to have been preferred by Menai painters. Some of the vessels with figures bear scenes from the Iranian national epic, the Shah Nameh, or Book of Kings, written by the poet Ferdowsi between 975 and 1010 CE. Here we have an example of the fritware composite body and then opaque white glaze with gilding and overglaze painting. The central roundel with a sun symbol is surrounded by 6 circular medallions with symbols representing the moon and the planets Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Saturn. The surrounding bands contain mounted horsemen and birds, geometric ornament, a row of seated courtiers, and musicians with 2 enthroned personages and an Arabic inscription in Kufic Script. A cursive Persian inscription surrounds the exterior. Representations of the planets and the zodiac signs were popular in Seljuk iconography. They are also seen on stone relief sculpture and inlaid metalwork and continue to be important motifs in later Islamic art. To summarize, we're indebted to the Islamic potters of this time period for a fritware body, tin glazed earthenware, stain painting using slip or clay, enameling, overglaze, and luster. We can't trace mosaics to them because the Egyptians had mosaics, but those were made of stone. Islamic mosaics were made of monochrome glazed tiles on a composite body set into plaster. The most important element in any mosque is the mihrab, the niche that indicates the direction of Mecca. Here we have one from the Madrasa Imami from Isfahan, Iran. Because the mihrab functions as the focal point in prayer ritual, its decoration was executed with great skill and devotion. This example is from 1354 CE, and it's composed of mosaic of small glazed tiles fitted together to form various geometric and floral patterns and inscriptions. The bottom of the niche just below the central inscription and a substantial part of the beginning and end of the main inscription were restored by skillful potters in Isfahan in the mid-1920s. In the far east of Asia, the Tang Dynasty has given way to the Sung Dynasty from 960 to 1279 CE. The Sung Dynasty reunited most of China proper after the Tang Dynasty fell to the Liao or the Jin. We can divide the Sung period into two phases, the Northern Sung from 960 to 1127, and the Southern Sung from 1127 to 1273. The division was caused by the forced abandonment of northern China in 1127 by the Sung court, which could not push back the nomadic invaders, the Jin. The founders of the Sung dynasty built an effective centralized bureaucracy staffed with civilian scholar officials. This system of civilian rule led to a greater concentration of power in the emperor and his palace bureaucracy than had ever been achieved in the previous dynasties. The Sung dynasty is notable for the development of cities, not only for the administrative purposes, but also as centers of trade, industry, and maritime commerce. A new group of wealthy commoners, the mercantile class, arose as printing and education spread, private trade grew, and a market economy began to link the coastal provinces and the interior. In ceramics, the Sung dynasty potters contributed great innovations in kiln and glaze technology that many ceramists still use today. In kiln technology, the Sung built what are called climbing kilns or dragon kilns. They use these kilns to fire their ware that many ceramic artists still use today. The kilns the Sung built to fire their ware were much more advanced than the Tang kilns. They were often built into a hill in a series of stepped levels, and sometimes they were as much as 165 feet long. The firing kilns were vividly portrayed by Chinese writers as giant dragons spitting fire. Most of these multi-chambered kilns were fired with wood, although some smaller ones used coal. And the potters wanted to prevent the free-floating ashes from spoiling their glaze. Their solution was to fire each piece in a sagar. A sagar is a fire-resistant container that would protect it from the wood ash. On the right, you can see fragments of a cup inside a sagar. The sagar is covered with wood ash. It's actually from Virginia, but it shows you what the sagar would look like. And then they're stacked in columns inside each chamber. The kilns in Longquan could fire as many as 2,000 sagars at one time. These are also called climbing kilns because they're built on the stepped levels that mimic the hills that Tang kilns were built into. Overall, form was considered more important than decoration for the Sung potters and the imperial court. Thus, their shapes became more complex. The contours were more flowing than those preferred by Tang potters. The Sung potters invented many glazes still used by contemporary potters. Some formulas were lost and rediscovered through trial and error. Others have still to be recreated. The refinement and production of stoneware and porcelain reached its height during the Sung dynasty, and there were 4 imperial wares produced that we'll look at today: Dingware, Junware, Ruware, and Guanware. This basin is from the Northern Sung dynasty period from 960 to 1127 CE. It's an example of Dingware, and it's 9 3/4 inches in diameter. The highly aesthetic, placid, and introspective atmosphere of both the northern and southern Song dynasties is reflected in the quiet elegance of ceramics in the classic court taste. Forms are simple and basically uncomplicated, while designs, when used, seldom intrude, but are content to be investigated at the viewer's leisure. There is literary evidence that the white porcelains known as Dingware were among those supplied to the northern Song court, and the beauty of this basin illustrates why Ding porcelain would have enjoyed imperial favor. Delicately potted and enrobed in mellow, ivory white glaze, this basin has a free-flowing, finely carved design of lotus and Sagittarius sprays that epitomizes the Song penchant for unobtrusive decoration. Dingwares were usually fired on their unglazed mouth rims, probably to prevent warping, and the rims were then very often capped with metal, as in this example. Junwares were made for the wealthy classes, for the temple, and for palace use. Many of the flower vases and planters used in the Forbidden City by the emperor and his court were of Jun manufacture. Stoneware clay was used, and here the glaze is blue to lavender, another of the typical Jun colors. The turquoise color results from the presence of copper oxide in the glaze. To get the splashes of purple seen here, the potter would first apply the blue glaze to the plate, and then using pure copper oxide, would brush a design over the unfired glaze. During the firing process, these areas saturated with copper would often turn a rich red-violet. Copper is the source of many of our most beautiful colors, green and turquoise in oxidation, reds and violets in reduction, for example. Roux wares are without a doubt the rarest of the imperial wares, and only a very small number survive, most in the Percival David collection in London. Specifically, roux ware was for the exclusive use of the northern Song emperor and aesthete, Huzong, and are almost always glazed with pale bluish-green celadons. On the right is a close-up from a roux ware bowl in which the pronounced crazing is very easy to see. Crazing is sometimes called crackle and is the fine network of fractures in the glazed surface. Technically, a glaze defect, crazing can often be quite beautiful. It results from a glaze that shrinks slightly more than the clay body during the cooling of the kiln. As pottery cools within a kiln, it shrinks. The clay and glaze need to shrink at close to the same rate, or an imbalance occurs. In the case of crazing, the glaze is shrinking slightly more than the clay, and in a sense is stretched too tightly. As this happens, stresses build up in the glazed surface, and it cracks, revealing a fracture. Here, these fractures are widely spaced and aesthetically pleasing. The Chinese aesthetes who collected and valued this pottery called such a horizontally oriented crazing pattern Cicada's wing, after the finely veined and transparent wing of the insect. The Hun invasions from the north in 1127 CE caused production of roux ware to cease as the government fled to the southern capital at Hangzhou, and it is thought that some of the official court potters fled with their patrons and set up the Guan Kilns and continued production. This is Guan ware from the Southern Song Dynasty. The Guan Kilns were operated by the Song imperial court potters. At the beginning, their limited output was intended exclusively for the court. With its high iron content, Guan clay is dark, while its thick, translucent glaze is a subtle, pale blue-gray. A distinguishing feature of this refined ware is the crackle pattern of its glaze, which was purposefully induced during the cooling process. The crackled glazes undoubtedly appealed to the refined antiquarian taste of the scholar class as well as the Sung court. This elegant plate shows the austere and quiet beauty so often associated with the best Sung pottery. It's a masterpiece of understatement. No decoration is allowed to detract from its simple fusion of form and surface. The Chinese have many poetic names to refer to porcelain. For example, Yingqing, shadow blue, and Qingbai, bluish white. And the variations in color, texture, and translucency have been analyzed endlessly by chemists, artists, and poets. Qingbai, bluish white, refers to a type of popular early porcelain. It was created in the late 10th century from a fine white paste covered with a thin, lustrous glaze that ranged in color between light blue and white. Qingbai wares were immensely popular from the Northern Song Dynasty from 960 CE through the Yuan Dynasty that ended in 1368. Objects range from crudely fashioned grave goods to exquisite eating utensils. The highly plastic clay body allowed the creation of light, thin-walled vessels with complex shapes that often incorporated molded, carved, and applique decor. The cool bluish tint is accounted for in part by the reducing atmosphere given by the fuel, a locally abundant pine tree. While the new and exquisite shapes with their subtle pale blue glazes were appreciated throughout China's middle and upper classes and in several foreign markets, Qingbai was not greatly revered at court. Wares have been excavated, however, from numerous tombs and kiln sites throughout China, the Central Plains, Inner Mongolia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. The Yao Shu District in Shanxi Province became an important kiln center in northern China during the Sung Dynasty. It produced thin-walled, gray-bodied ware with mold-impressed or hand-carved decoration under a translucent olive green glaze. These high-fired stonewares, and others made in at least 3 other kiln complexes in northern Shanxi, form a fairly homogeneous ceramic group generally termed Northern Sung, or Northern Celadon. Decoration is incised, mold-impressed, combed, carved, or applied relief. The glaze, which derives its color from iron and titanium oxide, will accumulate in the recessed areas of the design, creating a darker color, thereby giving emphasis to the pattern. Popular designs included flowers and grasses, waves, fish, ducks, children, dragons, phoenixes, and clouds. While admired by royalty, Yao Shu ware was not an official courtware. The bowl on the right is an example of mold-thrown ware. As with the Romans that we studied earlier, but this is the inverse process, meaning that a bisqued mold made in a dome or hump shape had been carved and incised before firing. The potter would place and center the dome on the wheel and then press, pound, and trim the clay to fit over the hump. A foot was then thrown onto the bottom of the turned bowl. Once it began to dry, the bowl could be lifted off the mold and dried upright. And in this way, the carving could be multiplied throughout a number of bowls until the bisque mold could no longer be used. The celadon of Lungshan is famous as perhaps the most refined green glazed ware of the Sung Dynasty. Manufactured at several sites in southwestern China, it evolved as a beautiful blue-green tactile glaze on a fine, durable porcelain body. With court patronage, Lungshan potters rapidly refined their vessel shapes and lime alkali glazes. The finest of these celadons had simple, elegant, well-proportioned shapes covered in a wide range of thick, lustrous blue-green glazes that resembled polished jade. Several of these shapes were based on ancient bronzes that were patronized by the scholar class as well as by the court. Southern Sung Lunchuan glazes were highly revered and imitated by the Qing Dynasty court during the 18th century. In addition to the imperial wares of the Sung Dynasty, Ding, Jun, Ru, Guan, other types of pottery were created for use by the population at large. We've looked so far at the Qingbai ware, Northern Celadons, and Lungshuan Celadons. Tamaku is another type that originated during the Sung Dynasty. Tamaku is a Japanese rendering of the Chinese term Tianmu, actually a place name. It is said that Japanese Buddhist monks who traveled to China to study and meditate found bowls such as these being used for tea and found them desirable. They were brought back to Japan, and local potters there eventually duplicated the effect. Tamaku is a name given to any high-temperature stoneware or porcelain glaze that is extremely high in iron oxide content. In fact, it's saturated with it. During the firing, the excess iron oxide migrates to the surface of the glaze, where it collects into spots of pure metallic iron. This effect can be seen in this famous example on the right. The glaze is so named for its resemblance to the fur of a rabbit. Another variation is known as oil spot tamaku, in which a network of tiny spots of iron oxide float in the glaze surface. Often these two effects are quite similar. Bowls such as this found great popularity in Chan no Yu, more commonly known as the tea ceremony. In addition to the austere and restrained styles more often associated with Sung Dynasty wares, more exuberant styles were created as well. One notable example is situ ware, made during the Northern Sung Dynasty in the area where the Yellow River empties into the Yellow Sea. The designs on situ ware are bold and striking and involve the use of sgraffito. A stoneware clay body was used, which was brown in color. Onto this, a white slip was first painted, then a black slip. Next, the potter would carve the designs through the black slip to reveal the white, and a clear glaze would be applied, which after firing would allow the black and white design to show. This example is quite representative, and the bold floral design of peonies and leaves is often seen in Chinese art. It's considered a symbol of royalty since the name of the peony in Chinese is a homophone for the words for wealth and rank. This particular shape is called a Mei Ping, or plum blossom vase. Its graceful proportions begin with a flat base that immediately narrows slightly, then swells confidently to the shoulder before narrowing in to a rather small neck. The purpose of such a small necked vase was to display a single branch or spray from a flowering plum tree. Many fruit trees flower before they leaf out in spring, and the plum tree presents spectacular flowers against a bare branch. Situ ware was produced primarily for use by ordinary people as opposed to use by royalty. The Jin Dynasty conquered the northern Sung, so they had to move to the south. And it's not clear if the potters remained and made this black and white ware, or if the technique and style of it remained and potters were inspired by it. The pillow is stoneware with black and white pigment. It's unglazed, 16.5 inches long. On the pillow's cloud-shaped top is a design of waterfowl in marsh grasses fleeing from a predatory bird. The lobed sides are ornamented with a distinctive conventionalized leaf scroll motif. So during this time on the Korean peninsula, the Koryo dynasty was in power, and Koryo potters invented an inlaid slip technique shown here. There's inlaid decoration of cranes and clouds under celadon glaze. Although inlay was widely employed throughout East Asia in metalwork and lacquerware, the use of the inlay technique in the decoration of celadon ware is specific to the Koryo Dynasty potters. This form is called a Maybelline. It's very much like the Chinese Meiping, a vessel with a small mouth, short neck, round shoulder, and constricted waist. The form is derived from the Meiping or prunus vase, but the Koryo form is distinguished from its Chinese counterpart by a saucer-shaped mouth and a body that forms a pronounced S-curve, resulting in a slightly flared base. In the slip inlay technique, the design is incised or carved into the unbaked leather-hard clay with a needle or wood tool, and the resulting depressions are filled in with a white or black slip. The piece is given a biscuit or first firing, then coated with a celadon glaze and fired again at higher temperature. By the mid-12th to early 13th century, the inlay technique had become the most frequently used method of decoration in Koryo celadon wares. Its successful application to celadons was made possible by the Korean potters' development of highly translucent glazes that allowed the decoration underneath to show through clearly. The body of this Maybelline is ornamented with inlaid clouds and cranes, symbols of longevity. The design is enhanced by the black outline of the fungus-like heads and long trail of the white clouds, and the black curved strokes that define the plumage of the birds. This is another example of the Koryo Dynasty inlaid decoration. Here, chrysanthemums are inlaid under celadon glaze. This bottle is 13.5 inches tall and was made during the height of celadon ware manufacture during the Koryo Dynasty. It attests to the technological and aesthetic achievements of Koryo potters in the production of elegantly formed and decorated vessels, as well as the Korean preference for themes from nature. Inlaid chrysanthemum blossoms are aligned along the bottle's gently curved sides, which have been formed into lobes. Inlaid celadon vessels, such as this example, epitomize the refined sensibilities of the Koryo aristocracy. While ordinary people used simple, undecorated stoneware, royalty and the aristocracy created demand for large quantities of celadon glazed objects. The finest vessels were made in official court kilns, which worked to government specification and were supervised by court officials. That concludes Lecture 7. Tune in next time for Ceramics of Europe and Asia, 1400 to 1700. If you want to read for additional images and context, here are the pages from Cooper and Staubach. Also, please look up the Ife culture online. Thank you.